My name is Michael Reeves. I'm 42 years old, born and raised in Austin, Texas, and now living in the quiet, pine-scented suburbs just outside Chicago. People call me a man who has it all: successful business, a sharp-looking house with clean glass windows, and a wife who turns heads when we walk into a room. And then there's my daughter, Emma. She's 9, the kind of kid who notices everything and says almost nothing. We read together every night. That's our ritual. From the outside, it probably looked like peace. But peace is a fragile thing. Sometimes it's just silence waiting to break. It started on a Thursday night in early autumn, the kind of evening where the leaves outside look like someone spilled fire on the sidewalks. I remember the exact moment. I was in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of bourbon after Emma had gone to bed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Claire, my wife, had left earlier that afternoon to have drinks with friends. That was her phrase, said with a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. Then I heard it, the sound of soft footsteps on the hallway tile. I turned. Emma was standing there in her pajamas, holding her stuffed fox by one limp arm. Her face was pale, her lips slightly parted. Something about the way she looked at me froze the drink halfway to my lips. "Daddy," she whispered. I heard them talking again. I lowered the glass. "Who, baby?" She glanced over her shoulder toward the dark hallway behind her. Mommy and the man, the one who always smells like oranges and leather. It took me a second. She meant Dylan. My friend, or I thought he was. Dylan Moore and I had served together overseas. Same unit, same dirt. He was the kind of guy you trusted with your life because you'd already done it in places no one wanted to remember. I'd helped him get back on his feet after the military, got him a job, gave him keys to my house. I knelt down to Emma's level. What were they saying? She hesitated. Her voice dropped even lower. "They're going to hurt you, Daddy. They said it like a joke, but I don't think it was. Mommy said you're in the way." There was a long pause in the kitchen. I should have laughed, told her she misunderstood, told her Mommy was just pretending. But I didn't. Because the way she said it wasn't a child looking for attention. It was a warning. Quiet. Cold. Clear. I pulled her into my arms. Her little body was shaking. "Did they see you?" I asked. She shook her head. "I was in the crawl space. I just wanted to see what they were watching on TV, but they weren't watching TV." My stomach turned. I put her back to bed, checked the locks twice that night, then sat in my dark living room with the lights off and bourbon untouched. Dylan had stopped by often these past few weeks. Claire always smiled more when he was around. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining things. Now, I realized I hadn't been imagining, I'd been ignoring. The next morning, I installed a new camera system in the house. Nothing fancy. Hidden in vents, corners, picture frames. One in particular inside a little room in the basement no one used anymore. A soundproofed space I used to use as a storm shelter, now forgotten and cold. I called it the quiet room. No one else in the house even knew it still had power. I told Claire I was going on a business trip. I wasn't. I stayed in the city, but I watched. 3 days passed before I saw something. Claire thought she was alone. She wasn't. She brought Dylan into our house like he already lived there. They laughed. They drank. They opened my wine. Then, late into the night when Emma was asleep and the wind had picked up outside, I heard it. Dylan. "You sure this'll work?" Claire. "It worked on his father." There was silence, the kind that slices through your skin like ice. Dylan. "Carbon monoxide's easy. No cameras in the garage. All we need is for him to be in there with the engine running." Claire. "And I'll cry for the cameras when I find him." I stared at the monitor. I didn't blink. They were smiling. Smiling. My father had died in that same way. In his garage. Headlines said it was a tragic accident. I never questioned it. He had been a good man. Too tired, maybe. Some people said he had depression. I had believed the reports. Until now, I felt something crack in my chest. A soundless break. Emma hadn't imagined it. She'd heard the truth, and now I saw it with my own eyes. My wife was planning my murder, and the man who used to cover my 6 in combat was the one who'd deliver it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the edge of my bed, listening to Claire's breathing. I watched her shoulders rise and fall. For the first time in my life, I understood something my father used to say. You never really know someone until they're standing behind you with a knife. Only now, I knew the knife had a name, and I wasn't going to die quietly. 3 days after I heard the recording, I met with someone I hadn't seen in nearly a decade, Frank DeSoto. Back in Fallujah, we used to joke that if you dropped Frank blindfolded into a minefield, he'd walk out with a cigar and a handful of enemy intel. Now he ran a low-key PI firm on the south side of Chicago, mostly cheating spouses and insurance fraud. But the look in his eyes hadn't changed. Cold, focused, dangerous. He didn't ask why I called. He just looked at me across the diner table, stirred his black coffee, and said, "You've seen something." "I need to know everything about a man named Dylan Moore," I said, "and a woman named Claire Reeves." His eyebrow twitched just slightly. "Your wife?" I nodded once. There was a beat of silence. Then he pulled out a small notepad. "You're not asking for marriage counseling, I take it?" "I'm asking for the truth. I think they're planning to kill me." That was the first time I'd said it out loud. The words didn't shake. That surprised me. I expected fear. Instead, I felt clean. Like I'd stepped out of something dark and sticky. Like I could finally breathe. Frank didn't flinch. He just wrote down the names. "You want me to start with him or her?" "Him. I think he's done this before." I gave him what I had. The security footage, the audio, a photo of Dylan with a woman I didn't recognize from an old party Claire threw. Her name was never mentioned again. Frank looked at the image a long time. "She's dead," he muttered. "What?" "I've seen her face. She died 4 years ago. Accidental drowning. Lake Geneva. Was married to some hedge fund manager. Money disappeared after." He tapped the photo. "This guy's not just playing house. He's got a system." The pieces started to click. Too fast, too sharp. What kind of system? Predatory romance. Probably picks vulnerable wealthy women. Charm, seduce, isolate, then eliminate the obstacle. You, in this case. He's a parasite. And Claire? Frank gave me a look I didn't like. She's not being used. She's a collaborator. By the next evening, Frank had results. 3 other women. Dead, all connected to Dylan Moore under different aliases. Daniel Morgan, Devin Miles, D. Matthew King, all married, all rich, all dead, all ruled accidents, no criminal records, no living family members that asked too many questions. No justice, just silence. And Claire? She had been slowly draining funds from my business accounts, a few thousand at a time, laundered through fake consultants and legal expenses. I hadn't noticed, because the numbers were low and the company's fake but professional looking. She was meticulous. Frank slid me a file that smelled like cold printer ink and mold. "She's been planning your replacement for months." In the photos, Claire on a beach, not with me. Claire in a hotel room, not in Chicago. My money paid for that suite. "Anything on my father?" I asked, feeling my voice thicken. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your dad had a sizable life insurance policy. Claire was the sole witness to his accidental death." I leaned back. The room swam. "You're telling me she killed my father?" "I'm telling you it's looking that way. And if she did it once, she'd do it again." I felt something inside me slide into place. A click, like the sound of a bolt locking shut. This wasn't anger. It was strategy. Frank looked at me carefully. "You want me to go to the cops with this?" I shook my head. "Not yet. They'd need hard proof, and if we move too soon, she'll disappear." "So what's the plan?" I answered without blinking. "I'm going to become the ghost they're afraid of." The next phase took precision. I stopped sleeping in the house, claimed business travel, moved into a secure apartment downtown. Emma stayed with my sister, under the excuse of giving her some girl time. Claire didn't fight it. I watched her through my cameras. She started wearing silk robes I'd never seen before, started drinking from my whiskey collection, moved through my home like it was already hers alone. I hired 2 more people. One was a man named Elias Knox, an ex-special operations interrogator with a face like it had been carved out of concrete and left in the sun. I didn't ask where Frank found him. I just needed someone who could apply pressure, psychological pressure, controlled chaos. The other was a chemist, retired, morally flexible. He owed Frank a favor, and that favor now belonged to me. I told him about Dylan's allergy to shellfish, something I remembered from a dinner years ago when he broke out in hives just from eating fries near someone's shrimp platter. He had a rare, severe anaphylactic reaction. Life-threatening. I asked the chemist for something that could imitate that allergy. Something that wouldn't kill, necessarily, but would look exactly like an allergic reaction, with panic, swelling, confusion. He nodded slowly. "When do you want to use it?" "Soon." Then came the whisper campaign. Lights began to flicker in Dylan's apartment. His car's alarm went off randomly in the middle of the night. His phone calls dropped mid-conversation. His credit cards started being declined. Just once or twice, enough to rattle. He started looking over his shoulder, started drinking more, started sleeping with a gun under his pillow. I watched all of it, and Claire. She became cold, irritated. She didn't like when Dylan lost control. She wanted a clean job. No mess, no risk, no drama, and now she had all 3. One night, through the camera in the quiet room, I saw them argue. She threw something. He punched a cabinet. "You said this would be simple," she snapped. "It was, until he disappeared," Dylan shouted. "My disappearance wasn't literal, but I'd stopped being predictable. I didn't call. I didn't come home. I didn't respond to her texts. I became a shadow, and it scared them. The best part, I didn't need to lift a single weapon. Not yet. I only needed them to feel what I'd felt, the sense that something was wrong, that danger was everywhere, that trust was a dead language. It was working. But I wasn't done yet, because fear wasn't justice. Fear was only the beginning. Dylan's hands were shaking. I watched him on my monitor as he poured himself a drink in my kitchen, my whiskey, in my glass, in my house, and spilled half of it on the counter. His nerves were unraveling. The bags under his eyes were darker, his smile twitchier. He wasn't sleeping. Claire had started snapping at him every few minutes, like a woman whose plan was beginning to rot from the inside. It was working. The night before, Elias had killed the power in Dylan's building at exactly 3:07 a.m. A few minutes later, every smoke alarm in his hallway started screeching in sync, even though there wasn't a trace of smoke. Then, just as suddenly, the power came back. No explanation, no maintenance reports. It wasn't just noise, it was a pattern, calculated uncertainty, a message that whispered through the walls, "You're not in control." By the end of that week, Dylan had made 2 phone calls to private security companies, asking about surveillance sweeps, hidden bugs, counterintelligence services. He was paranoid, but not paranoid enough to understand that the man he was afraid of wasn't watching from the shadows. I was already in the house. That morning, while Claire was at her yoga class and Dylan was out trying to reach one of the disappearing shell bank accounts she'd created, I walked into the home I built, not as a husband or father, but as a ghost. I bypassed my own alarm system, checked the cameras for their locations, then went straight to the quiet room. There, I installed a hidden audio system behind one of the old vents, something barely audible, low enough to make them question whether they were hearing it or just cracking under pressure. Voices would whisper. Footsteps would echo. A man's breath, like it came from another world. That night, when Claire opened a bottle of wine in the kitchen, she paused, just for a moment. Then she shook her head and poured 2 glasses. Later, when Dylan sat down to drink his, he made a face. "What is that?" "Chardonnay," she said. "No," he muttered. "Tastes weird." She waved it off. "It's fine." It wasn't. The compound, just a few milliliters, had been dropped into the wine hours before. The dose wasn't meant to kill. Not yet. It was designed to trigger a wave of physical symptoms that would mimic the early stages of his fatal allergy. Swelling, anxiety, shortness of breath, panic. But delayed. Subtle. Just enough to convince his body that something was wrong. Enough to tip him into fear, the kind that lives in the bloodstream. That was step 1. Step 2 would come soon enough. The next morning, Claire found the garage door open, the car engine running, the carbon monoxide detector disabled. But no one was inside. She stood in the doorway, staring at the quiet engine, at the coiled hose snaking from the exhaust toward the window. She looked around, not confused, but suspicious. She knew this scene, because she had once helped stage it. She knew what it looked like, a suicide in progress. But it had been interrupted, or faked. Her hands trembled. Then, something else. Her laptop screen flickered in the study. For half a second, her reflection vanished, replaced by static, and then came back. She froze. Watched it, waited. Nothing else happened. That night, Dylan told her, "We're being watched." "No," she said. "He's dead already. He just doesn't know it yet." But her voice lacked conviction. I could hear it in the way she said, "he." He was no longer a person to her. I wasn't Michael. I was the obstacle. I was the problem she thought she solved, the variable that wouldn't stay gone. So I gave her one more reason to doubt. The next night, at 3:11 a.m., the sound system in the quiet room activated. A single voice, heavily filtered, raspy, and slow. "You thought you buried me, but I was never in the ground." Then the lights in the hallway snapped on and off, rhythmically. Claire screamed. Dylan ran upstairs with a bat in hand, slipping on the top step, crashing into the wall. I watched him lie there for a second, breathing hard, muttering, "He's here, he's here." No one was there. But the fear was real. That's when I knew the final piece was ready. Frank called me the next afternoon. He was blunt. Feds poked around Dylan's finances. He's been laundering money through an offshore trust. Half of it's tied to a woman who died in Miami 2 years ago. Cause of death? Overdose. But her tox screen was clean. "And the trust?" I asked. "It's in your name." My blood went cold. "Excuse me?" "Not literally, but close enough. Claire used your firm to funnel money through legal service payments. The feds are asking quiet questions. They think you're either complicit or stupid." My jaw clenched. "So what's the risk?" "You go down as an accessory. They won't care if you knew or not. You're the face on the checks." I leaned back, eyes closed. They're burning the forest behind me while they set fire to the front. Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everything they touched, even my company, was a weapon. Even my name. That night, I sat on the rooftop of my downtown apartment, looking out over the cold sprawl of Chicago. My breath curled in the air. The letter in my hand was unsigned but written, a full confession in my own words. What I knew, what I did, what I planned. I hadn't decided whether to send it. Maybe someday Emma would read it, maybe not. Right now, I had a final performance to stage. The final act. I called Elias. It's time. He asked one question. Are we going quiet or loud? I said, let's start with quiet, then let them beg for the noise. The night of reckoning wasn't chosen randomly. It was Claire's birthday. She thought I'd forgotten. She hadn't heard from me in weeks, and by now she probably imagined I was either hiding in shame, lost in paranoia, or dead. Emotionally, if not literally. That was how she liked her men in the end. Hollow, broken, replaceable. But I hadn't forgotten her birthday. I just had a different kind of gift in mind. The plan had been set into motion 3 days earlier. Elias began the final phase with a simple tactic. Silence. No more disruptions. No more flickering lights or whispering voices. Nothing. Just stillness. And in that stillness, the paranoia festered. Claire began locking every door twice. Dylan started carrying a knife and a gun around the house and still refused to sleep more than a few hours at a time. They snapped at each other over nothing. Spilled coffee, missed calls, the TV being too loud. They were unraveling from the inside out, the same way they'd planned to undo me. But they didn't realize something. You can't con a man who's already been to hell. They thought they were manipulating a husband. But I was no longer just her husband. I was her reckoning. That night, they arrived back at the house around 7:30 p.m. Claire had dragged Dylan to a restaurant, some fake celebration to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But the whole time, she kept glancing around like someone waiting for a ghost to tap her shoulder. When they walked into the kitchen, a single candle was lit on the island countertop. No cake, just a candle, in a simple ceramic holder, and next to it, an envelope. Claire froze. Dylan looked around wildly. Is someone in here? Silence. Claire stepped forward, staring at the envelope like it might explode. Inside was a photo, grainy, black and white, pulled from the quiet room's recording. It showed Claire and Dylan the night they discussed my death. Her mouth mid-laugh. His face turned just slightly toward her, his hand resting on her knee. On the back of the photo, in clean block letters, "Happy birthday, Claire. This time, the candles are for you." Her hands shook. Dylan turned to the wine cabinet, grabbing the nearest bottle. "Screw this. I need a drink." Claire stared at the photo a second longer, then whispered, "Don't." But he was already pouring. The wine was from a bottle I had replaced days earlier. Identical label, identical scent, but altered. Touched with the same compound, this time in a higher dose. Dylan took a long sip. 10 minutes later, his throat began to tighten. At first, he tried to pretend he was fine. Then came the sweating, the scratching, his chest rising faster, too fast. He staggered backward, knocking over a chair. Claire screamed his name. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping, and then the lights went out. Not a power outage. An orchestration. The voice from the quiet room activated again, but this time not filtered. My voice. "You killed my father. You tried to kill me. You used my name, my house, my child. Now I am using yours." A low hum began to vibrate through the walls, a sound Claire had never heard before, one that made the hair on her arms rise. She ran to Dylan, shaking him, but he was convulsing, his face swelling, his breath rasping like broken glass. He couldn't speak, could barely see. She reached for his EpiPen, but it was gone. I had taken it from his coat pocket when I entered the house earlier that day. Claire backed away, sobbing. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I never wanted this." I stepped out from the shadows then, from the far end of the hallway. She saw me, and the look in her eyes cracked something inside me. Not pity, not fear. Clarity. She had never thought I was capable of this, and that was her fatal mistake. "You made me a monster," I said. "No," she gasped. "You were always—" Wrong answer. I reached for the phone on the kitchen counter, already prepared. I called 911. "My friend is having an allergic reaction," I said, calm, and I have proof that his partner was planning a murder. When the paramedics arrived, Dylan was still alive, but only just. His brain, deprived of oxygen too long, would never return. He would exist, technically, but the man inside him? Gone. Claire was arrested on the spot. Evidence was handed over, photos, audio, documents. Frank had made sure everything was curated and clean, impossible to refute. But justice is rarely simple. As the investigation unfolded, the web unraveled further than I ever expected. Dylan wasn't just a grifter. He was a killer, multiple states, multiple identities. Deaths covered in shadows. Claire's family, their name appeared in cold case files going back decades, every generation. Someone dead, someone richer. And me? My business had been used for laundering without my knowledge. But the paper trail still led to my doorstep. FBI, IRS. Names I'd only seen in headlines. Frank pulled me aside. "You have two options," he said. "Let them crucify you for crimes you didn't know you were part of, or make the trail vanish." "How?" His expression was grim. Fire, fear, silence. That night, Elias burned Dylan's apartment to the ground. A leak, a spark. No one hurt. Witnesses disappeared. Bank records were scrubbed. The threat to me? Gone. But so was something else. My reflection. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a man anymore. I saw a weapon, a father sharpened by rage, forged in betrayal. Months passed. Claire remained in prison, until the day she was attacked in the infirmary. A makeshift shiv, severed spinal cord. No one claimed responsibility. The guards claimed no one saw. Now she sits in a chair by a window, breathing, blinking, unable to speak or move. Alive, but silent. Exactly like my father, in the final days before his death. Only this time, justice stared back. Emma never asked what happened. Not directly. But one evening, while we were watching the sun fade through the pines outside my new cabin in Montana, she looked up and said, "Some people deserve to be afraid, don't they?" I didn't answer at first. Then I said, "Yes, but not because we want them to be, because they made it necessary." She nodded, thoughtful. 9 years old, and already wiser than I had been at 30. Later, I sat alone and reread the confession I'd written. All the truth, every word. I held it over the fire, and let it burn. There are no heroes in this story, only survivors. And in a world where justice is blind, sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to become the thing that monsters fear. Family is everything. Everything else? A price I was willing to pay. You know, life doesn't always give you clear choices. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones holding the knife. And when that happens, when betrayal cuts deeper than any wound, you find out who you really are. I did things I never thought I was capable of. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had to protect the one thing that still mattered. My daughter, my family, and even after everything. After the lies, the fear, the fire, I still believe one thing. You have to hold on to your humanity, even when the world tries to take it from you, especially then. Because being human isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing to fight for what's right. Even when the system fails. Even when justice has to come from you. If this story made you feel something, if it hit a nerve, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my place. This channel is full of true-to-life stories about ordinary people who've been through betrayal, hardship, loss, and still found a way to survive. Because in the end, the world isn't fair. But real people? They still fight. Thanks for watching. Stay strong. Stay human. See you in the next one.